Something strange is happening over Moscow, and the Kremlin does not want to talk about it. For months now, residents of the Russian capital have watched their own air defense network struggle to do the one job it exists for, keeping the skies over the seat of Russian power safe. And the frustration on the ground is starting to show. Muscovites are increasingly vocal about the fact that if the capital city cannot be protected, what does that say about the rest of the country? To understand why this matters, you have to look at where Russia has been putting its most advanced equipment. Systems like the Pantsir, one of Russia's more capable short-range air defense platforms, have been pulled back from the front lines in Ukraine and redeployed around Moscow. That is a telling decision. It means commanders judge the political cost of a successful strike on the capital to be higher than the tactical cost of thinning out air defense where Russian soldiers are actually fighting and dying. In other words, protecting the image of invulnerability in Moscow has taken priority over protecting troops in the field. And yet, even with that concentration of hardware, drones are getting through almost daily. Oil and fuel infrastructure around the Moscow region, refineries in particular, have been repeatedly hit, and by most accounts, several have been knocked out entirely. In just the last week, additional strikes have hit warehouses tied to key military and logistics supply chains. Multiply that pattern across months, and you start to see a slow, grinding campaign that is chipping away not just at physical infrastructure, but at the psychological sense of security inside Russia's most protected city. The numbers themselves tell an uncomfortable story for Russian air defense planners. Ukraine has been sending drones toward Moscow in the hundreds on a given day, and Russian systems are reportedly intercepting something like 60 to 70% of them. On paper, that might sound like a reasonable success rate. In practice, for a capital city with the densest air defense coverage in the country, it is not nearly good enough. Every drone that slips through is treated as a visible, undeniable failure, and there is no way to spin that away when the explosion happens, within earshot of millions of people. Part of what makes this campaign so effective is not brute numbers, but deception. There are persistent reports that Ukraine has found ways to disguise the electronic signature of some of its drones, essentially making small, cheap devices, some no larger than a dinner plate, appear on radar as something far larger and more threatening. If that is accurate, it raises an unsettling possibility. Some of these disguised signatures may be designed to mimic manned aircraft, potentially even something as sophisticated as Russia's own Su-57 stealth fighter. If true, this kind of spoofing could confuse air defense crews into misidentifying targets, and in the chaos of a fast-moving intercept, that confusion could lead operators to shoot down their own aircraft by mistake. This is precisely the scenario that appears to explain one of the more remarkable and more quietly handled incidents to come out of the war. And Su-57, the aircraft Russia has long presented as the pinnacle of its air power, was lost. And notably, the Kremlin has said almost nothing about it. That silence is itself informative. There are really only a few explanations for a loss like this, and none of them are good for Moscow. Either the aircraft was shot down by Russia's own air defense system, mistaking it for a threat, or it was destroyed by a Ukrainian strike that reached deeper and more precisely than expected. Or, less dramatically but still embarrassing, it suffered some kind of mechanical or operational failure and crashed on its own. Whichever explanation is correct, none of them fit the narrative Russian state media has spent years building around this aircraft as untouchable, cutting edge, and combat-proven. It is worth noting that this is an area of active speculation. Independent verification of exactly what happened to that aircraft is difficult to come by, and claims about friendly fire circulating through open source and military blogging channels should be treated as plausible but unconfirmed. What is notable, though, is the source of some of these claims. Pro-Russian military bloggers themselves, voices that have spent years amplifying the Kremlin's version of events, are among those suggesting friendly fire is the explanation. That is a meaningful shift. A year or two ago, this kind of admission simply would not have surfaced. The information environment inside Russia has been remarkably tightly controlled, and cracks like this are rare enough to be worth paying attention to. Step back from the individual incident and look at what it represents. If Russia's own air defense system did shoot down one of its most prized aircraft over its own territory, the implications ripple outward in uncomfortable directions. Ordinary Russians boarding a domestic flight, or even an international one departing from Moscow, now have to reckon with a genuinely strange question. Is there a risk their own country's air defense could make a mistake and treat a civilian aircraft as a threat? This is not a hypothetical drawn from nowhere. Civil aviation history already includes a tragic precedent. A passenger jet leaving Tehran a few years ago was brought down by Iranian air defense in a case of mistaken identification. The parallel will not be lost on people paying close attention to what is happening in Russian skies now. And this anxiety is layered on top of an already difficult domestic picture. Most Russians have limited ability to travel abroad given the current state of international relations tied to the war. If the perception grows that domestic air travel within Russia itself carries its own risks, the psychological toll on ordinary citizens compounds. People already report feeling boxed in, and now some are grappling with the idea that the danger is not only external, it might come from their own military infrastructure. There's also a deeper strategic story here about the kind of war Russia is choosing to fight. Manned fifth-generation aircraft like the Su-57 represent an enormous financial and industrial investment, often cited in the range of $100 million per airframe. Ukraine, by contrast, has leaned heavily into mass-produced, low-cost drones, machines that can be built for a few $100s each. If a drone campaign loses half or even most of its drones in a given wave of attacks, that is an acceptable and sustainable cost. Losing a single high-end manned aircraft, on the other hand, is a substantial blow, both financially and symbolically, especially at a moment when Russia's broader economy is under real strain from sanctions, falling energy revenues, and the sustained cost of the war. That economic backdrop matters enormously here. Reports suggest Russian oil revenue, along the backbone of the war effort, has been squeezed hard. Fuel shortages inside the country, rising prices at the pump, and a general tightening of household budgets are all part of the picture painted by people describing daily life in Russia right now. Losing an aircraft worth $100 million in this context is not just an embarrassment, it's a real economic wound, made worse by the strong suspicion that Russia effectively did this to itself. Zoom out further, and a pattern becomes visible in how Russia has approached this conflict from the start. On the ground, frontline fighting has in places resembled tactics and attritional warfare reminiscent of an earlier era, entrenched positions, slow grinding advances, heavy casualties for incremental territorial gains. In the air and in the electromagnetic domain, Russia appears to be lagging behind the kind of asymmetric, drone-centric, signal-manipulating warfare that Ukraine has developed out of necessity. Disguising a small drone's radar signature to resemble a much larger aircraft requires serious technical sophistication, the kind that depends on skilled engineers and scientists working the problem persistently. It is a modern approach to an old problem, using deception in mass rather than pure firepower. Meanwhile, Russia continues to pour resources into expensive, prestige-oriented hardware, aircraft designed to project strength and technological parity with the West. The math is stark. The cost of one Su-57 could fund millions of low-cost drones. When one of those prestige assets is lost, and lost in a way that suggests the country's own defenses may be responsible, it exposes a deeper vulnerability than a single battlefield setback. It suggests a military that, despite decades of investment in advanced weapon systems, may be struggling to adapt to the actual character of the war it finds itself fighting. There is also a communications dimension worth considering. For years, the Kremlin has run one of the more disciplined information operations of any modern conflict, controlling domestic narratives with a level of consistency that Western analysts have often grudgingly acknowledged as effective. Losses were minimized, setbacks reframed, and the war largely kept at a psychological distance from ordinary Russian life. An incident like this, an apparent friendly fire loss of a flagship aircraft that pro-Russian commentators themselves are discussing, represents a genuine breach in that discipline. It suggests that even within circles predisposed to support the official line, the strain of sustaining the narrative is starting to show. When the people usually defending the Kremlin's version of events start entertaining an embarrassing alternative explanation, that is not a small crack. It is a signal that something in the information machine is no longer running as smoothly as it once did. None of this means the war's trajectory is settled, and independent verified details about exactly what brought down that aircraft remain limited. Claims of friendly fire, drone signature spoofing, and the precise sequence of events should still be treated as informed speculation rather than confirmed fact until more evidence surfaces. But the broader trend is harder to dismiss. Drones penetrating Moscow's defenses with growing regularity, unexplained losses of high-value aircraft, a domestic economy under mounting pressure, fuel shortages reshaping everyday life, and cracks appearing even among pro-Kremlin voices all point in the same direction. Together, they paint a picture of a capital and a country increasingly forced to confront uncomfortable questions about its own military competence, questions it would clearly rather avoid answering in public.